Okay, for hip range of motion, we're gonna start with active range of motion for the hip. So to start with hip flexion, you lift your leg up like this. For hip extension, you put it behind you. For hip abduction, bring it away. For hip adduction, bring it towards the midline. For hip internal rotation, you're rotating your knee inward. And for hip external rotation, rotate it outward. Now to do passive range of motion, we're gonna have the athlete laying on the table on their back. So go ahead and lay on your back. Now remember, passive range of motion is the athletic trainer doing the movement. The athlete is not doing anything. So for hip flexion, so just stay relaxed, I would just lift his leg up, okay? For hip abduction, bring the leg outward. For hip adduction, bring it back towards the midline. For hip internal rotation, I'm going to do it by myself. Internal rotation, hip external rotation, and then, Zach, if you can slide towards me, to the edge, a little bit more. Okay, then I would just gently let his leg come down for passive hip extension. You can also do hip extension while they're laying prone on their stomach. Okay, now we're going to do resistive range of motion for the hip. So to start with, we're going to sit on the stool for hip flexion and internal and external rotation. Okay, for hip flexion, okay, your proximal hand is the one that's going to stabilize, okay? And in this case, his hip is already being stabilized by the chair. My distal hand, which is going to provide resistance, okay, he's going to bring his knee upward and he's going to hold it there. Okay, I'll have my other hand kind of by the front of the hip, but my distal hand is going to try and push him down and he's not going to let me. Don't let me push down. There we go. That was resistive hip flexion. Next, we're going to do internal rotation of the hip for resistive range of motion. And for that, okay, first thing is I got to put him in that movement, in that position. Hip internal rotation, okay? Now, my proximal hand is on the medial side of the knee. My distal hand is on the lateral side of the distal end of the ankle. What I'm going to try and do is push him into internal rotation and he's not going to let me. There we go. Now for external rotation, resistive, all I'm doing is switching my hand placement. So I put him in external rotation, hold it there. So my proximal hand's on the lateral side of the knee. My distal hand is on the medial side of the lower leg, distal end. And I'm going to try and push him, and he's not going to let me. Now, let's go ahead and get on the table and lay on your back. Or no, lay on your side, sorry, facing the camera. Okay? For hip abduction, resistive, my proximal hand is going to be right on his hip. He's going to lift his leg up like this and hold it there. My distal hand, providing resistance, is going to be on the lateral side of the knee. Don't let me push down. Good. Now for hip adduction, go ahead, bend your knee. Put it in front of you like that. Okay? My proximal hand is still going to be on the lateral side of the hip. My distal hand, providing resistance, is going to be on the medial side of the knee that we are assessing. So he's going to lift his leg up. He's going to hold it there. Don't let me push down. There we go. So that was resistive hip adduction. Lastly, we are going to do hip extension. So lay on your stomach. Okay. Now, hip extension was when he lifted his leg upwards. So go ahead and just lift it upwards. Okay. Hold it there. My proximal hand is right at the lower end of his back, and my distal hand is on the posterior side of his thigh, closer to the knee, and I'm going to say, don't let me push. There we go. That is the end of our hip range of motion for active, passive, and resistive.